few hundred years ago, slavery was supposed to be abolished. William Wilberforce had went before Parliament to put forward annually a bill for abolition of slavery. Now, eventually, when it was passed, and they effectively says to the slave community, you are no longer slaves. What we're going to do now is you're now going to join our new society. We're going to give you privileges because you're part of society now. You're no longer a slave. What they've actually done has been really clever, because instead of actually holding these people, a small group of minority of people, in slavery, they decided to enslave everyone. So they've actually taken this group, this is, it tended to be colours, and the past, they've taken them, added them to community, they've taken all the people together and said, right, you are now a citizen in our new community. So basically you become a citizen of the UK or America or wherever it is. But in doing so, what they're doing is creating a corporation for you. But when they do that, you're then bound to their rules. Their rules apply, and the privileges they give you out were rights that you were entitled to anyway. However, they now charge you for the privilege. Now, to establish the position, when people are actually born in this country, to keep this perpetuating, what they've done is they've said to the parents, when they have a child, the parents must register the birth of a child. Now, it's not compulsory, but if you do not register your child, they will fine you. I think it's up to £1,000. So they basically push this issue. Now, when you actually record your birth for a child, what you're actually doing is giving consent to the government, and the government set up a legal fiction for the child. Now, in my case, obviously my name is John Smith, but I have a legal fiction attached to me, which is Mr. John Smith, and that was created by the government at birth. So therefore, the government throughout my life will only deal with me as a contractual agreement and a legal title. They do not deal with a living man. But what happened is, when the government set this up, if we look at the basic principles, there was a child involved, the parents were involved, and the state were involved. So if we look at this issue and we use the statutory system, what it actually confirms is there's a contractual agreement, because they've asked you to sign submit a birth certificate, but it involves 3 different parties. So therefore, according to their rules, it is a contractual agreement. Now, if we take it that there's a contract there, again, the state rules stipulate that for a contract to be valid, there has to be various terms met. Now, again, we don't have to bother with all the terms. If you pick the simplest one out of the lot, was there full disclosure? Which simply means, were you ever informed that a legal entity was created for you at birth? Well, no, nobody was. Were your parents informed? No, they weren't. So therefore, on these grounds, it states that because there's no full disclosure, the contract is void. Now, if the contract's void, it means what we have now is a legal fiction floating about there, because it's on your bank cards, driving licenses, passport, but the fiction exists. The government use it in everyday life to penalise, punish you, or in their words, they provide privileges. But it's only done through this fiction, which they control. But we've already established through their own rules that the creation of the fiction was fraudulent. So what we do is we've confirmed with the setup of the common law court, we've managed to set up a system whereby people can actually, by submitting a declaration, confirm in fact that they're living men or women, and having established this position, what they can then do is claim ownership of this legal title. It exists. If you go to a cash line machine with a card, you put your card into the machine, you want money out. If you do not have the fiction, you cannot get the money out. So the fiction does exist. But what we do with the common law court is we ensure that the people are protected from attack and abuse by using the fiction. So if we establish the government do not have control because it was created fraudulently, the individual living men and women can actually apply for ownership. And by submitting an application online and declaring their position, they are then granted ownership of this fiction, which means by claiming that, the government now have no control and no authority over you. So in relation to issues which we have currently just now with this COVID legislation, it is not applicable to the living man or woman, and it would normally be applicable to a fiction, but if you own the fiction and the legal title, without your consent, they cannot enforce it. So that's a difference. It was all created at birth, and it was a deception created by the government. It's probably the world's biggest scam.
Oh,
He says,
yeah.
he said, but they've done that and the people aren't aware of it. But until the people realise that the system operates and effectively you are actually still in slavery unless you confirm your position standing under common law. He says all they've did is they've turned around and says, well, look, we're going to abolish slavery, but they didn't. They were actually clever. What they did is instead of having a small group, they decided to enslave everyone. And that's the way it works.